Hey everybody, Dr. Pearson. It's Chapter 6, White Collar Crimes, the most exciting of all the computer crimes. Uh, Maybe not. White collar crime, though, is by far the greatest number of crimes that you're going to run into. um, there are other crimes that are much more high profile, child pornography, hate groups, things such as that. But when it comes to uh, the commission of crimes on the web or on the internet, white collar crimes dwarfs them all. It's just not sexy. It's meticulous work. It's going through databases looking for transactions. It's kind of there's no glamour to it. You're never going to see a show called a white collar crime, and then you're going to show a guy standing or sitting behind a computer typing looking for transactional fraud for 60 minutes. So probably not going to happen. Um, it is where I cut my teeth, though, when I started computer forensics. My first case was in 1990. It was a contractor fraud case, and basically what they were doing is they would include the curtilage, which is the space between the fence line and the road of the facility. And when they mowed the grass on the inside, they included the curtilage, which gave them another 4 or 5 acres per cut, which added up to a couple $100,000 in theft over the year. So again, it's not sexy and super exciting, but it is absolutely the lion's share of all the work that a forensic investigator probably will do in their career. So we're going to talk about computer technologies, how they've altered ways embezzlement is committed. Talk about how computer technologies have increased the opportunities to commit money laundering. We're going to describe how computer technologies affect the crime of corporate espionage, and we'll describe how computer technologies are increasing through the use of the internet on fraud and crimes. All right, so going back to Edwin Sutherland, he's kind of the first to highlight the difference between street crimes and crimes of privilege and class. So there was a time when crimes were kind of all lumped together. And then this kind of group of people that committed crime, but they didn't really affect anybody, kind of started coming out, where transactional fraud, where someone made money, but there was really no victim defined. No one could really tell who actually committed a crime. So what happened in that, or what happens in that, is you have this kind of a class distinction. This white collar crime becomes a corporate crime, so to speak. You have blue collar crimes where people commit crimes within the workplace, in manufacturing jobs, and then you have street crimes or gang crimes, which are committed by people that are not in the business sector, but largely out on the streets that are robbing people, etc. Blue collar and white collar crime is not seen to be as dangerous, so therefore it's harder to get a long-term sentence for people. Now, in recent years, Bertie Madoff, for example, but his Ponzi scheme, he ended up getting a very severe sentence because people recognized that there were victims. So as the gravity of the offense grows and people can be determined. And that's why the prosecution spent so much time putting people on the stand, because if you just go in and say, look, Microsoft lost $1,000. All right, so do these numbers with me, because this is what a defense attorney will do to you. So look at these numbers. Bill Gates on his personal checking account makes $24,000 every minute. Oh, wow, $24,000. My client stole $10,000 from Bill Gates, which he then recouped 35 seconds later. Who's really at harm here? this poor kid that was just goofing around, or this individual that was just goofing around, or Bill Gates, the massive billionaire that has money on top of money. Well, of course, the heartstrings get played, and then you fall into this, oh, poor Bill Gates. No, of course not. You go, oh, Bill Gates, he's got more money. He doesn't need it. There was no gun used. No one got hurt. So what's the real crime here? And it's really now hard for the prosecutor to show some type of damages to this person. Whereas in like a Bertie Madoff, they were able to go in and show people that killed themselves because they lost everything. Retirees, they put people, one after the other on the stand, and the jury got to see real people, and they could put that money behind those people, and that's what ended up, getting Bernie. So you're seeing a difference in tactics because of white collar crime. You're seeing a difference in tactics. You're also seeing a difference in how people look at stuff. And I mentioned this once before. When you talk about intellectual property theft, which is kind of what this is, intellectual property theft is hard to prove when you're talking about things that people do themselves, like music downloading. When the Napsters and all those programs were in their heyday, transferring music from one person to another was seen as something that people should have the right to do. So you have these people being put in, going to court, being prosecuted by the Radio Industry Association of Artists, and what would happen is the juries would say, yeah, probably a crime, but who's really getting hurt here? And they had to really change the way they prosecuted. The other problem was they realized that most of the jurors probably were downloading music on their own. So they were also sympathizing with the crime, going, if that's a crime, then what I'm doing is a crime, and do I really want to make the law harder here just in case I get caught? So that's another reason, the society kind of sides with you in a way, and again, it kind of goes back to that Robin Hood effect, where the huddled masses look for that champion, and against the government and evil corporations and all that kind of stuff. There was a great hacking story. It was a TV show, and the name of the company was E Corp, for Evil Corporation. So it was a very interesting tale. All right, so embezzlement. Embezzlement is basically taking stuff without really anybody knowing it, because you have an ability to confiscate through your implied trust. If I take a cent, or if I take the half cent that's captured on every paycheck, for example, go back to The Office, where they put a code in, and they were able to capture the half cent, and then they got checks for thousands of dollars because that half cent added up. Well, that may not be caught right away because those half cents are put into a fund, and then interest is usually put on a fund, and no one's really managing that fund. It's just normally that fund would grow at a certain rate, and when that doesn't grow at a certain rate, people know that money is not funneling into that account. So the embezzler gets time to get that money. Embezzlers typically work for other people. They use their access, they use their trust to access the property that they want to get. An embezzlement is listed as a computer-assisted crime. It's not a computer-focused crime, because I'm not really attacking the computer. I'm not stealing from the computer. I'm putting something on the computer that's going to enable the computer to give me money. So again, the computer as either a tool, or the computer as a part of a crime. It's not the target. It's not the focus of my crime. I'm not trying to crack and steal from that computer. I'm looking to use some type of program, like a malware or something like that, to gather information for me. Modern, they call them modern embezzlement schemes. These are tougher to catch, because there are so many ways of writing code now to remove certain things from financial institutions. Embezzling can be very, very difficult. Um, but you also know that when you have an embezzler that's doing some type of technology, you're looking for people with special skills. You're going to have, if you have an embezzler, right off the bat, you got an insider. So that's going to take down the suspect pool to a much narrower group of people. So we have a smaller staff to look at, and then in that smaller staff, we may have those that we know are IT capable. Don't always be fooled by that, though. I can teach someone to put a malware or put in some type of device on a company without much notice and with very little training if I write the code right. So you may just have someone that mules your software in, and then the embezzler basically buys that software, that crimeware, they install it, and they make the money off of that. And that's where the crimeware applications come in. So I'll write a program, I'll write a nice little code for someone, advertise it, someone will buy it from me, and then they'll implant it on their company, and they'll make the money. I make my money from the sale of the software, and that's how crimeware works. So we have different types of mechanisms for embezzling or getting the code to embezzle. Basically, when you talk about the embezzlement schemes, go back to kind of your traditional scamming. So you run the register up an extra dollar, or you write down an extra dollar on a receipt, and then the person pays you $5. You take the extra dollar and you embezzle money from the company. Or as the company's receiving cash payments in, you don't put in the actual amount that's due. And again, it all comes down to trust. Embezzlement is a trust crime, and that's really why embezzlement gets people very upset sometimes, because it is such a trust-enabled crime. It's something that people don't like because they think there should be trust. If you're talking about bank clerks, things like that, they go through extensive amounts of audits and other things to make sure that they are counting correctly, that they are doing their work correctly. Look at Las Vegas. If you've ever watched a cash cage in Las Vegas, and I don't recommend standing looking at the cash cage for a very long time, which I did, and the security guard came over, and then we had to have a conversation, and it was kind of weird. But watching a cash cage and watching how they actually move money back and forth, there are 4 or 5 audit systems in place to make sure that that cash is actually being funneled correctly and nothing is disappearing. So there are lots and lots of different ways of auditing through the system. Technology has narrowed the pool of potential embezzlers to those individuals who possess specialized skills. Again, not always. All it takes is someone to get that code or buy that code to make it work. Corporate espionage. Corporate espionage involves any theft of proprietary business information through spying or deception, particularly the theft of trade secrets. Corporate spies can be divided into 2 different types. We've talked about this extensively, divided into insiders excuse me, and outsiders. 85% of corporate espionage is committed by the insider. I would say that's probably even higher, just because access to the system is so much easier when somebody is on the inside. Several factors have combined to increase the occurrence of corporate espionage. The corporate community's increasing use of information and computer technology. Global commerce has increasingly been conducted electronically over the internet. Again, go back to chapter 3 where we talked about less capable guardian and increasing pool. So the more people we have on the internet, the greater the population to rip off, and also the less capable guardian coming from the protections that those people have, firewalls, router switches with security, antivirus software, things such as that, or management that oversees and makes sure that the people are doing the right thing. And then there is an increase in spy tactics, corporates versus rivals, um, and nation states, as we talked about. Nation states really want our intellectual property, so you're going to see that increase in intellectual property theft because we are producing information now. That is what we make, and if that's what we make, then that's what people want to steal. So that's something that you need to always remember as we move out of this more industrial, or we move out of the industrial state and into the information technology world. Our true assets will be the private or the intellectual property and information held. Money laundering is the act of concealing assets. So basically what I have to do with money is if I take in cash, I have to put cash somewhere. I have to get rid of the cash somewhere. So a lot of people use technology to get rid of the cash. They'll have a couple of different PayPal accounts. A lot of gambling sites are used for money laundering. Basically what will happen is someone will set up a card game online, and then all the characters in the card game will be the same person, and they'll use their cash that they put into the into PayPal or into a bank and then transfer into PayPal. They'll transfer that around within those people into other accounts that belong to those people, which is actually me. And then all that money is then gathered on the other end and then just recompiled into a single payment or a single location. So we have to, when we're looking at that type of structure, we're looking at the ability for me to transfer money, funds, ill-gotten gains through the system. Massive online role-playing games allow me to transfer money through Second Life's a great example. Second Life, I could take money, put it into the Bank of Linden, buy things within Second Life, and extract it back out on the other side in my PayPal. So I may open up a store in Second Life, and then when I'm in Second Life, what I do is I buy a $10,000 pair of sandals from a store that I own, and then I can turn that back into cash on the other side. That's how technology is using it. It used to be done through legitimate real property, buying property, selling property, but there's a lot of people that are watching for that type of activity. When someone buys a lot of property in one place, or all of a sudden a small community has many banks, but there's only a very small population, then you've got warning signs that you may have money laundering going on. Some of the things that they use money laundering here for, they actually have to employ in places like Colorado that weren't able, until recently, weren't able to transfer money into the federal currency. So they had to do something to move their cash into a mechanism they could use for sales. Increasing use of technology provided basically a new wealth. Electronic cash transfers, cash exchanges, e-cash. A lot of these things, because of terrorism and because of the terrorist threat, are now monitored. And it's much more difficult now to do an electronic cash transfer of significant amount, but smaller amounts are not tracked, not traced, and it's very easy to transfer money back and forth. Create a Bank of America account, for example. I can transfer money between my accounts in Bank of America as long as I don't go over a certain amount. There is no tracking of what I do. I'm just moving monies around in my accounts, and unless I trip that trigger, no one, unless they're looking at me. Now, if they're looking at me, obviously they're going to be able to see it. But if they're not looking at me, I'm just going to be a part of the background noise, or what we call the white noise of the exchange systems, which is just, everybody doing exchanges. I don't stand out. Using Bitcoin today, using other types of electronic monies today is a great way of laundering money. So I can transfer money into a Bitcoin account, and then I can transfer the Bitcoin to someone else, and then they can transfer that back to me in another Bitcoin transaction, and that money now comes back and it's been laundered or washed. Law enforcement has the Bank Secrecy Act, Money Laundering Control Act, Treasury Department Financial Crimes, or the FinCEN network. That's not including Interpol, Europol. You have several agencies out in the Far East that are tracking this, and this doesn't also include other agencies like OSI, CID, the Secret Service, that are all out there monitoring stuff. So again, in today's world, money laundering is very possible. It's easy to do with small amounts through websites and things such as that, but it's getting harder. It's getting much harder to money launder online. It's actually easier now because everybody's focusing online to do things in the traditional world. Trade-based money laundering, it moves money through movement of goods around the world. So I buy a product, send a product, sell the product, bring the product back. A great example of this is people in the Congo were not paid for their criminal activity through money. They were paid through SIM card time. And then you could cash in your SIM card time. So if I bought a SIM card and I put 100 minutes on it, I could then take that 100 minutes and I could transfer that back out into real cash. So what they would do is they would transfer, their money mechanism would be SIM card minutes or cellular minutes, and that's how they paid each other to do certain things. As long as it's a mechanism or a medium that everybody agrees on, then the medium can be used. Okay. Transportation of large volumes of goods obscures the nature and character of any single trade transaction. Absolutely. Nations have limited resource to verify the exchange of goods across borders. Look at Europe. If I get something into the EU and I move it from France to Germany, there's no border guards. There's no tracking. I just have to get it into the EU, and getting the EU, I can move it through in several different ways. So it's all about getting access into a group of countries and then moving those items around within those countries to get the most money where you can for your good or your service. Some of the issues that you're going to run in when you talk about the transportation of large volumes of goods is the type of good. You typically don't want to have something that is vegetable or degradable, because you may end up getting held in a system where you have where you have a hold on an item or a place for a period of time. So moving objects of metallic or other things is a good way of doing this trade base or trade volume. Human trafficking works in the movement of money and goods. People are worth things, so moving people from point to point, selling people from point to point is a good way of laundering money. So I can buy people, move people across, and then I can trade out people for money or goods. All right, identity theft. Identity theft has just blossomed and gone crazy on the internet. It remains, the most frequent type of consumer fraud. Complaints of identity theft peaked in 2007, but the funny thing is they peaked, mostly because that's when we started tracking this stuff. Before 2007. We really didn't track identity theft as well. It's gone down a little bit in 2009 and 2010, but it's on the rise again, especially after the social media bloom, the troll bloom. Identity theft has become very relevant again, or prevalent, as I guess it would be a better word, in our computer crime society. How do people get your stuff? All right. So first of all, what are they looking for? We're looking for PII, personal identifying information. Okay. PII are those things that are unique to you: mother's maiden name, date of birth, where do you live, driver's license number. All those kinds of things are PII, things that are useful for someone to steal from you. So how do I get that? Dumpster diving, direct theft of mail, shoulder surfing, hacking information from corporate databases, bribing of employees who have internal access to computer identifiers, skimming devices. These are all ways that people gather information. Some other newer ways that people are doing: getting onto genealogy sites, Facebook, becoming a friend of someone, and over a week or so finding out what their date of birth is, where they live, what their, hey, is your what's your maiden name? What were you? It's not your married name, is it? And the person gives up their maiden name, and all this information is gathered. It may take a week or two, but if you have money, it's certainly worth my investment in time to get all this information, and then we can start looking at or gathering data. You'd be very surprised if you go on Twitter. In fact, if you want to do this experiment, you're more than welcome to. Go out onto Twitter, go to photos, type in passports, and look at all the passports that have been taken pictures of. People take pictures for many different reasons that have been sent online to another person. And you have passports from every country, to include military passports, U.S. passports, etc. So it's amazing what people will put online, and it's not hard to get this personal identifying information, or PII. There are Identity Theft and Assumption Deterrence Act came out. This was the first time that when some teeth really got put into the law. When I was at the Sheriff's Department, it was a civil responsibility. So people would come in and say, I think someone stole some money from me. Well, we would say, well, who was it? And they'd say, well, my Capital One. Well, actually, the person was not the victim. So I couldn't put that person on the report as a victim, because they're not the victim of the crime. Capital One was the victim of the crime. They're going to be made to pay Capital One, but they're still not the victim. The victim was Capital One. Capital One actually had to make the report, and then they would be a part of the report. So you get a hold of Capital One, and Capital One would say, yeah, nope, we're not interested in filing yet another report. And then that person was kind of lost, and then they had to fight with Capital One. This went on back and forth. They had to go to the civil side. And then the Identity Theft and Assumption Deterrence Act came out, and it changed that. Gave the rights back to the consumer, gave the ability for those people to actually change and get their credit records and kind of clean up the mess that was left by the identity thief. FTC has established an identity theft clearinghouse, which is a very good. You can go to the website, ftc.gov. You can fill out a form. They'll give you the forms to get a hold of your credit unions. So you can let Equifax and TRW and all these exchanges know that you have been a victim, and they can then adjust the credit bureau records. It's not instantaneous. It takes time, lots of time. People will spend 4 and 5 years cleaning up a single incident of identity theft. So it's a serious thing. Once it goes out, it's kind of like throwing a pebble into a lake, little tiny ripple that just keeps going and going and going and going until it finally hits the shore and dissipates. Well, it's going to take time to get all that in, because as soon as you throw that pebble in, it goes across the internet and just grows out and turns into something much greater. So where do these fraud schemes come from? We've talked about a couple of them. Chain letter hoaxes. My daughter got one that said, if you don't pass this on, your child is going to die. So there's all these different ways of enticing and encouraging people to be a part of the chain letter hoax. Send me $1 and my cancer-ridden grandfather will have a chance at living. Those are all things to tug at the heartstrings, get you to send money. There was an email that went out recently that talked about a person that was caught in an IED attack, and they basically were now handicapped, and they could not walk anymore, and it was just this whole long story. And it turned out to all be fake because people were looking to gather money off someone else's loss. Confidence schemes, bait and switch con schemes. Hey, look, buy this and you spend X and you get something else. Very classic one of the eBay con schemes was a box that was on eBay and had a big X on it, and it looked just like a no picture symbol, but it was an X box, and you would pay $240 for this new X box, and in the mail you would get a box with the X on it. So you bought exactly what it is you were looking at on the internet, but it wasn't what you thought. It was a bait and switch, basic con game. They show you one thing, or they pretend to be one thing and you get something else. That happens with jewelry quite often. Several types of internet fraud: financial institution fraud, online fraud, auction fraud, the Nigerian scheme. Hey, you've got a relative out in the Africa that has a kingdom, and they're going to give it to you. You just got to, pay them. And then phishing, where I'm looking for that personal identifying information. Online auction fraud. I had a case where an individual sold their Spider car to an individual for $48,000. The car never existed. The $48,000 was sent from this individual to the other individual, and no car ever arrived. He came down to the sheriff's department, and it was found that the money had gone to the Philippines the day after the person had bought it. Absolutely nothing you can do about it. So he was out $48,000 on a car that never existed, and it was a very elaborate auction fraud. But be very careful of auctions. If you don't know the auction, if you've never bought from the auction, if you've not done a test buy on the auction, be very careful on the auctions. Make sure it's a reputable site. Financial institution fraud. People put up fake websites all the time. This is Bank America. It looks like Bank America. It feels like Bank America, but the URL just looks weird. So make sure that you're at Bank of America. There's, you check your URL, make sure it's a locked site, make sure that it's, an HTTPS site, all those types of things that people should do. But institution fraud, it's very, very costly because people believe in institutions. If it says it's Bank of America, it should be Bank of America. So faking that is very easy to do. The Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. It did stop a lot of crime. I give it kudos and credits, but it doesn't come anywhere near to having the teeth it needs to really put the different fraud schemes out of business. Nigerian scheme, for example. Again, we're talking about people that are ideological, people that are doing this for some other reason. The Abuse Act just doesn't have the teeth for that. And if you're outside the United States, it's also reliant on all these other countries working with you. So in the United States, it works. I would say it works pretty well. But outside of the United States, again, the Fraud and Abuse Act becomes complicated at best. And there are just a lot of countries that just don't subscribe to it. So with that, I think we are at the end of our slide set, and hopefully this has answered any questions you had about the slides we've had to this point. Make sure that you read the book. Sorry. And look at the little boxes and snippets they have in there, because they got a lot of good examples. They go in a lot more detail than we do in the slides. So there are some things that you're going to pick up from the text. So please dig into the text, and I will see you on the next slide set. Thanks.